more amazing moments in American history, in my opinion anyway, is the decision not to have a king. These European men, the founders, had lived as subjects of King George, and they decided that all men are created equal and that not one of them should be set up as sovereign over the others. Of course, by all, they meant all white, male, property-owning people. But, it was a step in the right direction. The decision to not have a sovereign went against the conventional wisdom of the day. Well, not all the conventional wisdom of the day. There were Native American nations that were much more democratic than monarchic, and the decision to have a democracy instead of a monarchy certainly then went against the conventional European wisdom of the day. But I still am amazed that we decided not to have a monarch. And that's in stark contrast to our reading from Samuel. It's important to remember the political history that gets us to this point in Israel's story, at least the way the Hebrew Scriptures tell it. This group of people really started off as a horde that could be politically identified most prominently as being freed slaves. Once they conquered and occupied the land that they believed had been promised to them by God, they lived as a confederation of tribes who were guided by judges. Samuel was a judge. Samuel was a judge who had influence in all of the tribes of this confederation of tribes. It turns out that he was really the last of the great judges and the first of the prophets. So he has a pivotal role, a transitional role in Israel's history. At this point in the story that we heard today, he is the leading judge in this confederation of tribes, and he assumes that his sons will inherit this role, only his sons are really up to no good. They're easily influenced and bribed, and so they won't be inheriting his position. So given the geopolitics of the day and the consideration of what we will do for leadership, since it won't be Samuel's sons, the leaders of the tribe came to Samuel and said, "Give us a king." I mean, that's what other nations seem to be doing. They have kings and they're able to defend themselves. So the leaders said to Samuel, "Give us a king." The only problem was that as far as God was concerned, Israel already had a king. It was God. That's one of the important themes in this story, that God is sovereign. And God had been their sovereign since leading them out of slavery, but insisting that Samuel appoint a king for them. By doing this, the Hebrews rejected God as their sovereign. We want to be just like everyone else, just like all the other nations, so give us a king. God and Samuel knew that there were dangers. Kings draft your children and send them off to war. Kings accumulate wealth for themselves at your expense. They tax you excessively to pay off their cronies and to make their wars possible, and you're not going to like that. And did you hear the line, "The king will take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers and courtiers"? 1/10. A tithe. He will take what belongs to God. But the people insisted, and the king was selected, and as fate would have it, it fell upon a man named Saul, and sure enough, Saul went to war almost immediately, and he worked to consolidate his power by threatening execution. In other words, Samuel's warnings were right on target. I think it's important to look at the Hebrews' motivation when they went to Samuel to ask for a king. They were anxious about their security. They looked at the mega nations to their north and south, Assyria to the north and Egypt to the south, and they trembled and they asked themselves, what do these mega nations have that our little Confederation doesn't? And the answer that they could easily see was they had kings. And so we need a king. It made sense. Kings offer security, or at least it seems that they do. And kings are tangible. We can see them and talk to them. And God is not tangible, and God wants to be a blessing for all the nations, not just our nation. So won't we be more secure if we have a king? It seems to me that the reaction is not restricted to years gone by. If you look at the reaction our nation had to the attacks on September 11th, 2001, our nation that had purposely been founded without a king passed laws that gave the president kingly powers. Not only was the size of the surveillance state increased, but the president was essentially given the power to declare war. Not only did our presidents, plural, move us into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but into wars in Yemen and Pakistan and Somalia through the use of drones. Why hadn't the Congress taken back these kingly powers? I suspect it's the same reason that the Hebrews asked for a king in the first place: fear. But the issue for today's sermon isn't American politics per se. The issue here is faith. Give us a king, the Hebrews demanded of Samuel. Give us someone who is corruptible. Give us someone who will offer us a false sense of security. Give us someone who will make us forget our hope and our security lies in God and in God alone. A cry went up from American Protestantism, especially mainline American Protestantism, a few weeks ago when the Pew Research Report on the State of Religion in the United States was released. Woe to us, for we have lost a 3.4% share of the American population. Woe to us, for we are now only 14.7% of the American population. Woe to us, says the mainline Protestantism. And some of us are responding by looking at the mega churches to our north and south and saying, what have they got that we don't got? Why can't we be like them? What have we got to do? I heard a story this past week from a pastor who once served a church as a youth pastor, and the mega church down the street from the church he was serving had this huge youth group. And they wondered why we don't have a huge youth group. And it turned out that the mega church had a contest. The person that brings the most friends to youth group gets an iPod. And he thought, yeah, we could do that too. But would it be faithful? Ooh, we've got the biggest bribery youth group in town. It's the dilemma the Hebrews faced. A king might be effective for a time anyway, but was it faithful? Remember, faith is not primarily about what you believe. Faith is primarily about fidelity and trust and how you view the world. Asking for a king, demanding a king, what did that say about their faith in God? The question for the Hebrews wasn't, or at least it shouldn't have been, who will lead us? But how will we follow God and walk with God? We have the same question before us. As a congregation, how will we follow God and walk with God? As individuals, each one of us has the same question before us. How will we follow God and walk with God? Our task is always one of listening for God's vision for us. There is no one answer that fits all. There's no one vision for each of us or for each congregation. For each of us is different. Each of us has talents. That's the thing that I was trying to say with the children today, that we're all different and our differences make us special. And as times change and circumstances change, God's vision for us may change as well. One key component is understanding who we are. Now, I know what it's like to want to fit in. to be just like everybody else, and I suspect the same is true for congregations. We are, at least from time to time, want to be just like everyone else, to fit in, to not stand out. But other times we may want to be just like them, the successful ones, but what does that mean? Usually what we're talking about is attendance, right? In the church, that's what is successful. But is that God's vision for us? There are plenty of gimmicks we can try to grow our church, but if it's a gimmick, I suspect it's not very faithful. What will grow the church is not giving away iPods, but giving ourselves away. I got an email a while back trying to sell me a pledge campaign for the church, and I didn't bite. But I really liked the central image that they used, especially if you transfer it over to evangelism instead of fundraising. And the metaphor that they used was a call to move from soup spoons to ladles. Think about it, a soup spoon. Why do you have a soup spoon? Well, that's to feed yourself, to get soup from your soup bowl up to your mouth. If you have a ladle, it's to fill bowls, and not just your own. Well, what if evangelism wasn't about soup spoons, but was about ladles? What if evangelism wasn't about what we're going to get out of a growing church, but what we're going to get by giving ourselves away, by filling other people's bowls? If my evangelism is about filling my ladle, then it becomes about giving away, filling someone else's bowl. And I think that we are generally called to fill the bowls of those around us, not just our own. Pastor Brenda is going to take a group to a workshop on evangelism in September. The workshop will teach some approaches to ladle evangelism through interpersonal outreach. Emphasis will be on learning, working, practicing, and increasing confidence. Time will be spent on concerns about interpersonal outreach. Maybe we should say anxieties about interpersonal outreach. Learning how to talk about our church and faith in an authentic but respectful way. Role-playing until the participants can invite with ease. If you think you want to go, talk to Brenda. It's in September, late September. Go to the workshop or not, it's important to pay attention to what's motivating you to invite people to church in the first place, or to do anything in the church. Is it anxiety about the Assyrians to the north and the Egyptians to the south? If that's what's motivating you, take a breath. Decisions based on fear are seldom faithful. Decisions grounded in faith, in trust and fidelity, are going to work much better. The great poet Bob Dylan tells us we're going to serve somebody. Remember that all the options other than God, whether the money, prestige, or the popular idol in Bible times as it is now, national military might, any option other than God is a false option, a false promise of happiness or security. As God pointed out in Exodus, the Egyptian army is all wet. Samuel warned the Hebrews that security offered by a king would be short-lived. But God, that's where our real help comes from. When we glorify God, when we remind ourselves and each other about God's glory, then over the crowded field of idolatrous contenders, we worship the true one, where our security lies. Thanks be to God. Amen.